It's the Big Picture Podcast with Gus and Dominick Pfisterer.
Hello, my name is Dominick Pfisterer.
And I'm Gus Pfisterer.
And welcome back for episode 2 of the Big Picture Podcast, the podcast where we paint the big picture regarding the contemporary issues within the sports landscape.
We have a great show for you today, as we're going to dive into the personal side of Michael Jordan, the impact of the Jordan brand, his quest for glory, his never-ending relationship with the media, and his struggle with immortality.
If you missed us last week, you can find us on our YouTube channel, the link to which is on our Twitter page, at podcast_picture, and on our Instagram account, The Big Picture Sports. We are also on Facebook. Gus, how you doing today?
Doing good, Dom. Really excited to jump into episode 2.
Really excited. Episode 2, let's get into it. Throughout his career, Jordan has become more of a symbol and less of a human. The Jordan logo took over for the being that is Michael Jeffrey Jordan. And the logo, Michael Jordan changed how companies view athletes as more of cash cows and symbols of American capitalism rather than athletes.
Absolutely. Athletes have always stood on higher pedestals than the rest of society. In ancient Greece, the Olympic athletes were looked at as gods rather than mortal human beings. The platform stands tall today and really transcended in the 80s with the birth of Air Jordan.
Yeah, Jordan became more than just a basketball player. He quickly became a global icon and turned Nike into this juggernaut. Perhaps the biggest impact that the Jordan logo has had is that it blended sports and society together and created a different sports culture. Kids could watch Michael Jordan play on TV and then walk a mile in his shoes, wear the Jordan shoes the next day. What does Jordan sell? $3 billion?
$3 billion in footwear and apparel sales each year.
And most of these sales are to kids who have never seen him play before. The Jumpman logo isn't even identified in focus groups as a silhouette of an actual person, even though that person's actual name is often printed on the merchandise. The Jordan logo has become like McDonald's golden arches or the Batman symbol or the Apple symbol. It stands for something more than the human. We don't attribute the Jumpman logo to Michael Jordan. We attribute it to excellence.
Yeah, his nickname among his inner circle is Yahweh, and that translates directly to God. And it's important that we focus on that because it's impossible to remain normal in society when you are put on that high of a pedestal. Anytime you meet somebody, he's most likely the most important person they've ever met in their lives. Anytime he steps into a room, he's most likely the most important person in that room. People feel the need to cater to his every need, when he wants and how he wants, because of this status.
Kids can put their shoes away, and this is the biggest difference, is that kids can put their shoes away and return to normalcy. They can go to school. They can do their chores. Michael Jordan can't do that. He will forever be the Jumpman. That is the legacy the media helped create for Michael.
Yeah, we've seen this formula over and over again with athletes at the top of their respective sports. We talked about it last year with Tiger in golf, Brady in the NFL, Jeter in baseball, and we're already starting to see it with Zion in the NBA. It's an unbelievable parallel because these people are being packaged and sold, and it almost strips away their sense of self-worth and dignity and creates a figure that is essentially who they're being told to be. It's not who they are as people anymore, their personal side. And it doesn't really matter the name behind the product because the name will always be relevant. It will always be able to sell stories and make money based off this likelihood.
We talked last week about Tiger Woods, and very similarly to Tiger Woods and Eldrick, the whole dilemma there. The dynamic, the more you read and research about Michael, the less you're going to get to see his personal side. Mike grew up as a country boy, for lack of a better word. His family, they like to hunt, they like to fish, they raise hogs, they raise chickens. They regularly attend church as a family. Like Tiger, Jordan grew up with a military father. And in a New Testament, mother, a military father and a New Testament mother. Both of his parents, James and Dolores, grew up in Old Testament houses. So like Tiger, Michael's first lesson that he learned was hard work. James and Dolores taught all 5 of their children hard work.
That's their main value.
That's their main, and we see that. But Michael was raised by his parents. He was raised by a community, by the stories of those who came before him.
Jordan doesn't go home very often, Dom, and he claims that this is because a personality split was made with him early on. There's the public persona and the private persona, much like Tiger and Eldrick, as we discussed last week. But the private persona is Mike, and that is the guy that loves watching old westerns because it reminds him of his father, James. Him and his father used to watch all the old westerns, and they would rate them as their favorites. And this is a thing that he does with his best friend George now to replace his father. I felt like Mike kind of died when James was murdered, and having these westerns is essentially the last thing he has to hold on to.
The struggle with being Michael Jordan, aside from the headlines and being in the spotlight, is that when you lose a parent, and we saw the same struggle with Tiger, you lose a parent, it is hard. But the harder thing is that they don't have a chance to grieve, is that Michael Jordan had an expectation to perform, essentially, and not just perform, but he was the greatest player in the game. So he had to go out and remain to be the best player in the game. And we saw that even with Isaiah Thomas, too, when he was a Celtic. His sister dies in a fatal car accident, and he's out there the next night. There's no grieving period, and that's another divide between athletes and the rest of society. But the public Jordan, the symbol, he needed constant security protection as he was the greatest player in the game. The private person, as we saw in the Last Dance documentary, he felt most at home around who? Middle class Chicago cops who worked with narcotics. They took bullets. They kicked indoors. These were people who knew what it meant to work for a living and to live by a simple code. These guys reminded him of home. That's why, like I said, during The Last Dance, there was so much emphasis on his security team and how loyal he was to them. I think they reminded him Mike was still in there. He was quoted saying, "My ego is so big now that I expect certain things. Back then, as Mike, I didn't."
Yeah, normally when Jordan travels, he's in the backseat of a chauffeured car or on a private jet. When he goes home to North Carolina, he drives. He's the only one that can drive because he knows the roads. And he doesn't go home often because it hurts. And everybody loses track of Jordan, and the only way to find him is to text his best friend George or call his best friend George, because George has been devoted to Jordan since they met in Chicago when he was a kid, essentially. And Jordan has devoted his life to George because that's his sense of comfort. And he sees a lot of his father in George. Over the years, moving from house to house, Michael has kept every single letter that him and his parents shared back and forth while in North Carolina. And there's a story where his assistant was sitting by his side as she watched him come to tears looking at these letters. And this was the first time she had seen Mike and the person that was lost to fame and glory. The same day, he lost the combination to his safe, and you only have 10 attempts before you're permanently locked out and you need to blow up the safe to open it. So on the last attempt, he became obsessed with finding it out. And he looked through notes and really prepared, and he finally got it on the last time. Inside was his '84 gold medal and this overwhelming feeling of nostalgia that really did bring him to tears. And the thing is, in 1984, there was no shoe deal. There was no Michael Jordan. There was no Jordan brand. He was just a kid chasing his dreams. He was Mike at that point.
He was simply playing basketball, but that story really shows his desire to win. He has this obsessive nature about him that he must succeed. He must win. A major critique on Jordan from the general public is that he has had gambling problems in his past. There are hundreds of stories of him torturing teammates while playing cards, or money he owes people from golf matches. The media loves to push this story as a problem or a flaw. However, this is not a character flaw from Jordan, but rather a result of his obsessive desire to win. Gambling simply provides him a platform to win and to compete, and he has gravitated towards that.
I think you're right, Dom. He always feels a sensation to win at something. He's become obsessed with this game Bejeweled. It's a game for the iPad, and he's over level 100, and he's actually ranked internationally as one of the best players in this game. He's also mastered the game of Sudoku. It's just a game he would play with his assistants, and it was a way to challenge his mind, not just his athletic ability. He once said that, "I can't help myself. It's an addiction. You asked for this special power to achieve these heights, and now you got it. and you can't give it back even though you want to. And if I could, I would. I could finally breathe. In an interview with the reporter Ahmad Rashad, who we saw in The Last Dance, he said, I've never had a gambling problem. I have a serious competition problem. And this is who Michael has become. He's impossible to be satisfied with anything besides being the absolute best. That's why people say, I want to be the Michael Jordan of. It's not just basketball. It's, I want to be the best of whatever task I join in at.
The GOAT, right? The greatest of all time. But the ugly side to this greatness is the self-centered, bully, cruel behavior that we saw towards his teammates in The Last Dance. He was truly pushing them to their limits. He strongly believes in Darwinism, always sensing and attacking an opponent's weakness. He can never turn that off. That's why he is successful in business negotiations as well. This started because he firmly believes that his father liked his brother Larry more than him. His competitiveness is a direct result of him pushing to earn his father's affection. You know, he is his biggest critic and enemy. If Mike is truly dead, it's due to that feeling, that insecurity that drives him. He is often described as someone with great rage, when in reality, it's just his mentality.
It was the way he was raised, Dom. His competitive drive is so intense that even as the owner of the Charlotte Hornets, he's had many seasons where he realistically should have tanked, gotten a good prospect, built around them, sold whatever pieces he had, and just kind of went forward. And even though that would be in the best interest of the team, he refused to let it happen because of that mentality. He wouldn't come suppressed to those feelings of losing. Another interesting thing about Michael is he strives for the number 218. That was his playing weight. And when he always figured that he would be the most dominant player at 218, and he always feels, even into his 50s, if he could get to 218, he could still play in the league, and he firmly believes that. After one of his fishing trips, he came back and he weighed 261 pounds. 9 days later, he got himself down to 248. He works out in a frenzy, especially when he watches old film, because then he gets it in his mind. If I can get down to 218, I could be Michael Jordan again. I don't have to be just a name. I could show everybody I'm still here.
I mean, if I got to 218, it'd be a little bit different. It truly is an obsession. It's not even a competitive mentality. It's an obsession of winning. He studies players now, especially LeBron with all the comparisons. LeBron, Jordan, which side are you on? He studies LeBron now. He knows that when LeBron is going to go left, he's going to pull up for a jump shot. And he knows that when LeBron drives right, he's going all the way to the rim. He knows he can't stop LeBron driving all the way to the rim, so he knows that he would force LeBron left and make him shoot a jump shot over him. He's more engaged in the flow of the game than the people actually playing the game. He studies the game like a true student. The idea of a return to basketball, even to this day, sits in his mind because the feelings he has can never be replaced. He can never feel satisfied with all aspects of his career and struggles, that he has had to live with how things turned out.
It's not just on the basketball court either. That's what the amazing part is. It's even more in business. There's a story that one time he was hanging out with the former president, Fred Whitfield, and in his closet, he had half Nike gear and half Puma. When Michael saw all the Puma gear, he immediately grabbed a knife from the kitchen, threw out all the gear on the ground, and ripped it shred by shred. And after, he called Nike to replace everything that he had destroyed. But it was the sense of he felt that since that owner had Puma gear and not all Nike gear, he was losing both sales and popularity, and he wouldn't put up with that. The first thing he does when he meets people, he looks directly down at their feet to see what kind of shoes they're wearing. And if they're not wearing Jordan, he makes a phone call.
Obviously, we talked about all the big victories and dominance with Michael. However, there's one thing that bothers Jordan more than anything, and that is the thought of Father Time.
Father Time conquers all. And that is the thing, like you said, Michael just cannot get out of his head. Michael always thought that he was going to die young. And that was a secret he always kept from the public because of the strangeness of the thought. It's not something you really want to push, especially if you're Michael Jordan. He used to talk about it with his mother all the time, and she would get very angry at him and yell at him until he stopped bringing it up. So this is a thought that is deep inside of him. And the problem is he never imagined himself growing old. or going through the process of getting old, like losing dexterity in his muscles or slowing down. And that's why he hates birthdays, because he feels like he's losing and he's getting taken out of the spotlight, and Father Time is winning slowly. He feels so powerful and so on top that death almost seems more likely to him than losing his fame or his health. When Whitney Houston died, it deeply affected him because it made him aware of his own mortality. Someone so iconic, someone such a public figure, and they were just gone, and what was left was a legacy. And we saw that when he was at the podium with the Kobe funeral. He really struggled because he was once again made aware of his own mortality. And essentially, he's scared of the thought that he will just be a legacy that's left behind.
That's kind of what the media created, that immortality with the Jordan logo, and that he's greater than a human being. And I think that is why that he hates being alone, because that means it's quiet and he doesn't like silence. He can't sleep without noise. Sleep has always been a struggle for him. All the late night card games, the trips to the casino during the playoffs, they've been misunderstood. They weren't the disease, they were the cure. They provided noise, distraction, a line of defense. He didn't even start drinking until he was 27. After complaining of insomnia to a doctor, he was advised to have a few beers after the game just to take the edge off. Jordan would take up smoking in 1991 because he used it to ease the stress of his long drives to the stadium before games. This is how he has to cope with being Michael Jordan.
These are so just important, and it really breaks down the person. And he's not a wicket. You know, the person behind the screen, there's a lot more to him. There's emotions. There's deep thoughts, like the immortality thing. He's scared of losing Michael Jordan.
This fame doesn't come with a guidebook. Nobody truly knows how to handle it. And so he's almost pushed into these different vices. And the big picture with Michael Jordan here is that Michael Jordan is a once-in-a-generation athlete and the icon that the media could not slip by.
Yeah, and I guess he really does try to change. That's the interesting part. He met a woman in 2011. Her name was Yvette Prieto, and that ended up becoming his wife. She never got to see Michael play. She never really knew who Michael was until they met at a club. Her family never watched basketball. They're Puerto Rican culture. It's not as ingrained in their cultures as here or overseas. So for the first time since he was 18, he probably felt a little bit like Mike. And he now loves to go on these sailing trips with his wife, which is really strange because his whole life he had a phobia of water. And that phobia stemmed from watching a good friend of his get caught up in a current and actually drowning in the ocean. And years later, when he was 11, he was at a baseball camp and he was in a pool and he was actively drowning. Obviously, he was saved and everything returned to normal, but it really messed with him psychologically. So to this day, he's not really comfortable with being in large bodies of water or on boats, but he's trying to overcome that fear and conquer that obstacle that's in his way because, honestly, if he conquers a fear, it feels like a victory to him, and that's all that he's been chasing.
Just chasing success, victory, winning. People will always remember Michael Jordan for who he is and what he did on the court and the impact he made globally. However, you think back to the Hall of Fame speech, the Jordan meme, the crying Jordan meme, he was funny, confident, sarcastic, and even competitive. We saw the emotions much like we saw when he spoke at Kobe's funeral. We saw the person behind the brand. It revealed that these icons are just kind of like us all along. They're just forced to show it differently.
Absolutely. I think that moment really defines Mike inside of Michael Jordan. And another moment that really goes with that is when he received the Medal of Freedom from President Obama. He stood beside people like Tom Hanks, Bruce Springsteen, Diana Ross, Vin Scully, Robert Redford. And his mother was in the crowd watching him. For the first time in his whole entire life, he didn't feel bigger than the moment. And it really showed on his body language and in his face. Wright Thompson writes in his piece about Michael Jordan, Michael has not left the building. When we see this famous shot, Michael Jordan clutching the Larry O'Brien trophy, he's often cradling it, wrestling with it. The man and his prize intertwined. His grip is aggressive. That's not how he looked standing next to President Obama receiving his medal. He bowed his head so that the shorter man could drape it over his neck. He received it. This was an object placed on him, not one he took. A grace, not a demand. Something he earned, not one he took. Instead of hunching over, hiding his spoils, he stood there with a medal hanging on his chest. He looked out over the gathered crowd with something like humility and gratitude on his face. It's one of the few moments in his public life where he seemed to consider and appreciate how long and unlikely the road had been. In that moment, the guns were holstered, and the work it must have taken to keep up all those loaded guns, minute by minute, day after day, it felt heavy, and it felt real.
Well, Jordan, talking about Jordan, we never got to see him play. You're a 98 baby. I'm a 97 baby. If we did see him play, it was with like the Washington Wizards. So we didn't get to see Michael Jordan. All we did was hear about Michael Jordan. We watched Space Jam. He was a mythical, it was almost like he was a unicorn, some mythical figure. He was more closely like a Babe Ruth to me growing up. I didn't even know if the guy even existed if he wasn't with Bugs Bunny, you know?
Much like Babe Ruth, as you mentioned, and much like Michael's upbringing, we're relying strictly on stories. And we're relying on our past, much like how Michael had to rely on his.
And the storytellers of our generation are the media, and they create this larger-than-life figure. That's why I like The Last Dance. I thought they did an amazing job bringing it into the realities of the whole situation.
Absolutely. It completely changed the way that documentaries have been viewed. I mean, they had 500 hours of archival footage that they didn't even think they were going to use. And to see that all laid out in a 10-hour documentary, it really changed people's perspectives.
It's a very well done piece, and it gave us sports in a time where we need sports more than ever.
I agree now.
And that's just about all we have for today. Until next time, I'm Dominic.
And I'm Gus Pfisterer.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week on the Big Picture Podcast.
It's the Big Picture Podcast with Gus and Dominick Pfisterer.